But we begin with a massive bit of news from the recruiting world as the top quarterback in the 2024 cycle, five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, commits to a school that just can't, man, about time Georgia Bulldogs have something go well for them on the field or on the recruiting trail. Georgia lands the commitment from the 6'3", 220-pound quarterback from Phoenix, Arizona. He is the son of a former NFL offensive lineman, Dominic Raiola, and he chose Georgia over USC and Nebraska, among others. He was previously a commit to Ohio State, decommits from the Buckeyes, and now he is headed to the Bulldogs. There are a lot of levels to this. There were some strong connections, where he could have maybe been able to be a big haul for Matt Rule. That USC, Lincoln Riley, always going to be a big selling point. But this is Georgia being able to go and get the best quarterback in the class. Danny, are the Dogs no longer just grounding and pounding? Do you see this as like the Georgia is doing that big level up thing where even offensively we start to see things sort of take off in the future?
Yes. And how scary is that?
I know.
Because, and it's kind of crazy because Kirby was brought to build Alabama East. And that's exactly what he's done, almost with a very exact same blueprint as Nick Saban did when he was at Alabama. Like, you win on defense in the trenches, right? You build from the inside out, but you build a defensive mindset where you can dominate, keep scores low. You play with adequate to, good quarterback play. Because Stetson Bennett played good this year. But it hasn't been a focal point of theirs to get and the guys they've had at quarterback have been good, but not great. And now you get a potentially transcendent quarterback. This to me is just Kirby taking it to the next level, to the next stratosphere, which is kind of crazy considering they might win their third in a row this season. It's wild.
It's a big time get, man. Number one overall prospect in the country, number one rating. He's a really good player. Big time tools, already like college ready, physically pretty productive in high school. I think he has a real chance to hold on to the number one overall spot. We'll see him in Elite 11 in June. We'll see what he does in his senior season. But this is not as deep of a quarterback year as last year was. And for Georgia to miss on Arch Manning and to come back and say, you know what, hey, 2 titles in a row. Here you go. You watched us win the national title in person and just destroying TCU by 7 or 8 touchdowns. That's a huge get for them because I think the drop-off from Raiola to the next guy is probably bigger than the drop-off was from 1 to 2 last year with like a lot of guys that we had in Nico and Dante Moore and all those guys after Arch.
Here's my question. We all know he's highly rated, Dylan Raiola. It's not really a brand new day for Georgia, though. This is not the first time Kirby Smart has landed a top QB, highly rated 5-star player in the class. The last time this happened, Justin Fields showed up, and he was sitting on the bench behind whose name's completely
Jake Fromm.
Jake Fromm. Are we going to see the same thing? Is Raiola going to be sitting on the bench for a year behind somebody else, whether it's Beck or Vandegrift or something next season, and then end up at Ohio State? Or the big question to me is, will he be playing right away? Is he going to step on the field as a freshman and be given the reins of a team that could be coming off its third national title, was probably coming off at least a college football playoff appearance, or are they going to have him sit, learn, and grow?
I think he's probably a sit guy, honestly. And I think if you commit to Georgia, you know that going in. Not that they're going to tell you can't win the job, but I think the likelihood that you win the job of guys that Georgia clearly thought enough of to keep around behind Carson Beck this year, they're going to have a leg up on him as far as knowledge of the system. But you play in the SEC East, or well, I guess there's no more SEC East after this year. Georgia plays in enough games where they have a whole bunch of blowouts, and they can probably get a whole lot of guys in. So I would expect him to get reps, but I don't think he's going to be a player who comes in to be an immediate starter. And that is probably more of a commentary on Georgia's quarterback room than it is on Dylan's skill set.
You mentioned, is there to your mind that if he is potentially going to be able to hold on to number one overall spot, is he the number one quarterback? And that's not even a question. There's very little that you could see happening this fall that would change that order.
There are guys that I think have tools who could potentially, if they just have a massive senior season and really blow up at Elite 11 when we get to see all these guys June 14th to 16th, and compare them all. And there's some real value in that, right? Like standing and watching these guys go one after another, you start to pick up on differences, even amongst the elite players. But I think the combination of the performance and the bloodlines and the physical tools that he's already put on display make it pretty unlikely that somebody passes him, but it's certainly not impossible. Like we do care an awful lot in the ratings process about that senior year as well, because not everybody grows on the same timeline. Some guys just really show up late and end up being awesome.
So if Matthew Stafford gets the MVP Recruiter of the Year award for being able to lock this down for Georgia, who gets the dunce cap for messing this up?
I don't know that anybody completely messed it up, but I think that you could kind of get on Matt Rule a little bit about this offensive coordinator hire. So look, Raiola's uncle is the offensive line coach, right, for Nebraska. That's a pretty good feather in your cap for recruiting. He's the only person on Scott Frost's staff who was retained coach-wise. And then Matt Rule goes and hires Marcus Satterfield, who South Carolina fans basically threw a parade when they got rid of him. And I don't think that the Marcus Satterfield hire is a competitive hire if you are trying to sign top quarterbacks. I actually looked. He's had 14 seasons as a quarterback coach, offensive coordinator, or head coach. And I pulled the numbers from each of those stops with these quarterbacks. These are terrible. Like if I had a kid, my son, who was a top quarterback prospect, there's no way I would send my kid there. And I just personally, like, this is really, really bad. Look how bad Spencer Rattler was last year. And then, the final few games, whatever happened there, we can all speculate as to, what was going on with the offense. I just don't think that's a competitive hire if you are trying to recruit top quarterbacks, which if you're in the Big Ten West, you don't actually need top quarterbacks to win, but we're not sure how long the Big Ten West is going to be around. Think about it. You're probably going to go to a non-divisional format in the Big Ten. And if your goal is to win the Big Ten, Michigan recruits good quarterbacks. Ohio State does too. Penn State does too. Wisconsin is trying. Iowa, not so much. But I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, to me, that's a non-competitive hire. We mentioned this a couple of months ago when we did the show from Nashville. And I'm just like, I think this is kind of hiring your boy. And the guy's track record with quarterbacks is horrendous.
I'm going to push back on this a little bit.
All right.
Because I'm looking at Satterfield's history as an offensive coordinator, QB head coach. And I'm looking at the quarterbacks he was working with and the schools he was doing it at. I mean, no disrespect to Greg Preston or Dexter Anoka or Joe Huseman. Like, what kind of numbers are we expecting from these guys in any offense? And you mentioned Spencer Rattler last year. 66% completion rate, 3,000 yards, 7.6 attempt, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. The year before at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler averaged 7.9 yards per attempt with 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions while completing, 60% of his passes. Like, it's Spencer Rattler. He was doing the same thing with Lincoln Riley that he was doing with Marcus Satterfield. So I don't know if I'm putting that on Satterfield. And on the other end, if we're going to say he didn't choose Nebraska because of Satterfield, like, we're going to pretend Mike Bobo is some sort of incredible draw for a top-rated quarterback given his history. And I'd say Mike Bobo's history is better.
A ton better.
Yeah, but it's not like he's Lincoln Riley. It's not like he's got like some air raid. He's produced 1,000 first-round picks. So I think the reason he went to Georgia is because Georgia's won 2 national titles, and Georgia's going to be competing for more national titles. And it's a very good place to play. And if you can get Stetson Bennett drafted, you're probably going to be a first-round pick if you're any good doing that at Georgia. Like, I'm not going to say that Satterfield had no impact on this, but I think if just in a vacuum, if my choice is the 2-time reigning national champion or a Nebraska team that hasn't been to a bowl game in 5 years, even if my uncle is on that coaching staff, I'm probably choosing Georgia.
Sure. Now, if you're the dad of a top quarterback recruit, you're going to have big-time options. You're not going to pick Nebraska if this is who they hired at offensive coordinator, right? Like, this is a fumbling of the bag, I think.
Nebraska.
I'm not saying you would have picked him if he had a different offensive coordinator hired, but like, look how bad Rattler's numbers were before those final 2 games of the year, which I think a lot of people in South Carolina will tell you something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think something else was going on as far as the play call in there the last 2 games. So, to me, you can't kneecap yourself if you're trying to compete with the big dogs to sign a top quarterback. This is just, to me, it's a fumbling of the bag. I'm not saying they would have got him, but this, there's no way I'd sign off on this. Would you guys seriously? You'd be like, yeah, 14-year track record of this is bad.
I'm leaning more towards Tom of the total package. Like if I was coming out, and I remember having these conversations with my dad coming out, being a highly sought after recruit, you kind of make a list of what you're looking for, right? And I think, and I guarantee, players have changed, the landscape has changed, but I was just jotting down a list of what I would look for if I was a high school quarterback coming out. And you tell me, in any of these categories, does Nebraska have the edge? The opportunity to win a title, Georgia cleared head and shoulders above. Surrounding talent, which would probably go in the same category as winning a title, but it's not even close. Like you want to be able to throw to elite level talent, to be blocked up front by elite level talent. Georgia's proven track record of that. NIL opportunity, which is something I added in there, and NFL opportunity. In all four of those categories, I would say you've got a significant edge for Georgia. So I think the bigger surprise would have been a shocking decision if he would have gone to Nebraska. The other thing too is, you guys have uncles? I had an uncle.
Mhm.
He was kind of odd. Like he'd give me a book every year for Christmas. Like he was like, my dad's my best friend, but even my dad would be like, "Oh, we got to go see your uncle today." I'm like, he was kind of awkward, totally different than my dad. We don't know how much that relationship comes into play. So even though there's blood there, it might not be the best idea to think that was going to seal the deal.
Dude, uncles are
one of my
weird.
uncles trying to get me to live with him.
Podcast.
My Uncle Joe, who I adore, when I was in high school, first starting high school, he was trying to get me to move in with him because he was telling me he would get me into Northwestern or a Big Ten school. He would have me working out with him every day, studying, get to go play football. And I was just like, love you, Uncle Joe, but I think I'm just going to live with my family.
And when I'm in the uncle position, like I'm odder. I can't even help it. I say things and I'm like, what was I even saying right there? You're just being I'm being a dad. I'm being normal. Now I'm being an uncle. I'm being weird. You can't help it. Uncles are weird. It happens sometimes.
I'm an uncle. Come on now.
I am too. Sometimes just say odd stuff. It's just uncle talk. It's okay.